To the group chat. Jim Acosta is here, independent journalist, host of the Jim Acosta Show on Substack, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. My recent appearance on his show is now available. John Della Volpe, we haven't seen him in ages. He's back, director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics. He's also an MS Now political contributor. Dan Nathan, co-founder of Risk Reversal and a CNBC Fast Money contributor. And she is back. We have not seen her in ages. 11th hour was too late for her. She's off leading campaigns. Liz Smith, Democratic strategist and senior advisor to political organizations, Majority Democrats, and the Bench. Okay, Liz, let's start with the Fox News poll. Because Brit Hume, I watched him on TV last night say, quote, "There's not much good news for Republicans in these polls."
There isn't. But I would note that the Emerson poll is a bit of an outlier from what we've seen in other polls, where Democrats really only have advantages on issues like health care costs. Republicans still had advantages on issues like immigration, for instance. So I want to just everyone should just calm down about the polls, not do all that. My biggest concern right now, though, is that we have articulated very well a good anti-Trump.
We being Democrats.
Democrats, a good anti-Trump platform. But I still feel like voters do not know enough about what we stand for. And that's why we're seeing the rise of a lot of these DSA candidates. And a lot of people from my wing of the party are concerned about these DSA candidates. Frankly, I am too. There's no evidence that we've seen them able to, flip a red seat. But they're doing something that a lot of the people in the ossified establishment aren't doing. They're connecting with the anger, and they're offering up some solutions. I happen to think they're reckless solutions. Defund the police, abolish immigration and customs enforcement, throw everyone up private insurance. But my wing of the party has got to do a better job of putting up a big affirmative vision for people to rally behind, one where we take on Donald Trump, yes, but turn the mirror on ourselves and say no more stock trading for members of Congress and their spouses, lifetime lobbying ban. Also, let's do the biggest health reforms in a generation by giving everyone the option to afford Medicare. I know you talk a lot about young people and they're concerned about housing. Let's rip down all these stupid regulations that make it impossible to build houses. Let's get immigration reform for the first time in a generation. We need to be going out there and presenting these big aspirational platforms ourselves.
You're talking the abundance movement.
Well, a little bit. I'm just saying, let's have some big ideas of our own and not just say, well, vote for me because I'm not Donald Trump or vote for me because I'm not the Democratic Socialist, because that is not a winning message.
You're our resident pollster. What's standing out to you, my friend?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is I agree in terms of younger people and the broader electorate are looking for those specific solutions. They want to make America affordable again. Okay, but when you look at that Emerson poll, and it could be an outlier, but there's a consistent theme through a lot of the polling, is that Donald Trump is not holding Republicans like he did in 2018, right? So right now, there's a 80% or so of Republicans of Trump voters say they're voting for the Republican in the midterms, and that is a major warning sign. And I think that is why Trump is trying to nationalize this election. There's been recent reporting that he's campaigning more in this cycle than he did in his first midterm cycle. And the reason is that he needs to wake up those Trump voters every 4 years and to change this electorate, because that is, I think, one of the bigger stories here is that the split between the MAGA and the more mainstream Republicans. Right
but will he wake enough of them up with this message that he has, that they're communists, that they're anti-capitalist, that they're going to change the country? Is that enough to get Republicans to simply say, I'm not okay with Trump, but I want this America, and I'm afraid they're going to break it down?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I think, first of all, the food fight in the Democratic Party is not a good idea. It's extremely counterproductive. I do think right now the Republicans are facing, winter is coming. The question is whether it's a bad winter or a nuclear winter for the GOP right now. But I do think, the Republicans and Donald Trump, they're their own worst enemy right now. They're nominating election deniers in Arizona. I mean, those people are going to be on the ballot, too. But to Liz's point, I totally agree that the Democratic Party is in need of some fresh ideas. I saw New Jersey Senator Andy Kim from your neck of the woods, Stephanie, propose Medicare for all kids, a MediKids program. It's a terrific program. That's something that people can rally around. I mean, when I look at Trump's, bat bananas, I don't want to curse on your program, speech last night, and he's calling Jon Ossoff Pinky Herman. He can't even get the name calling right anymore. Jon Ossoff is not a communist. James Tallarico is not a communist. I mean, some of this stuff is overblown Fox News Bolshevik nonsense.
I think the Democratic candidate now in Maine is probably a good example of kind of what Liz is talking about in a way. So you had this ultra progressive, and now you have somebody who was conservative, is now a little progressive, but kind of tacks more to the center. And I think when you think about what's going on in like Michigan and the like here, a lot of these DSA candidates, like you guys said, is scaring a lot of moderate sort of or those in the center. And I think that is probably a good sort of kind of entree to to a race that's really important. I know it's going to be a difficult one. Obviously, there's not a whole heck of a lot of time, but that's something that maybe gives me a little optimism about the sort of candidates that should be running.
Okay, can I just add one more thing that I think is really important? I watched an ad the other day for Ed Markey. And the people in Ed Markey's ad. Ed Markey has been in Congress for 50 years.
5-0.
5-0. 7 years longer than I've been alive. And he features Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and it goes to show that we talk about the gerontocracy problem in the establishment wing. It is all across the Democratic Party. And we've got to take that on because that is a big problem that voters have with the Democratic Party.
Okay, but I'm going to tell you something, Liz.
And
I bring this up on this show.
Yeah.
And you know what Twitter says to me? You're ageist, Stephanie. What kind of ageist monster are you?
You know what? I don't give I don't care what Twitter says. This is the truth.
Jim's the only one who's allowed to curse. So just hold it. When he just said Bolshevik there, I was just panicked, leaning in where we were going.
Look, I have never cussed in my life, but what I would say is that we need to have some limits. Age limits, some term limits for committee chairmanships at least, and to be able to say, if you don't know your name or where you are, you probably shouldn't be serving in Congress.
If you're calling it the Facebook time.
Some of these
one of the most popular
hearings,
things that you can poll in terms of age limits for members of Congress, over 75% of Americans, majorities across the parties. I will say, if anyone can beat that back, it could be Markey in my state of Massachusetts. And the reason is, I think, he is unique in terms that he understands, has always been part of technology.
An oldie but a goodie.
But he could speak, I think, to some of the both progressive issues, but also the tech and the AI. It's something that he's been a leader on for decades and decades. So
okay,
it'll be interesting to see if he can kind of be the one.
I'm not sure it's so much about ageism, and we've got to get sometimes these congressional hearings sound a little bit too much like the homeowners association at the retirement community. It's like a Seinfeld episode. You're in my parking spot. Don't be that kind of Parker. But is that Curb Your Enthusiasm? I'm not sure.
Curb.
Yeah, but no. But why, instead of age limits, why not term limits?
I think we should very much have that conversation.
And not just for Congress, but for the Supreme Court. I mean, I just think that, there is a reformist movement that's happening. We're on the cusp, I think, of a revolution, political revolution in this country. But it's not for democratic socialism, although that gets overblown. I think what a lot of these folks are talking about is life in Scandinavia, not in the Soviet Union. But putting that to the side, I think people want reform in this country. They see Donald Trump and the grifters totally out of control, turning the White House into a blank house. And they've had enough, and they've just had enough, and they want to see things change in Washington.
Do you think, Dan, that Democrats can mobilize around the economy? Right? We can look at all the data and say, you know what, the economy has actually been stronger under Democratic presidents, yet the majority of the American people do not know that. And by and large, they've trusted Republicans when it comes to the economy. There's an opening right now when more and more Americans are saying the economy is a top issue for them and they don't like the way Donald Trump is handling it. Do you see a lane and a strategy for Democrats to message, put together policy, and mobilize around this, one might argue, unique opportunity?
Yeah, sadly, they're going to need somebody who actually has that pointed message the way Trump did, right? If you go back to 2024. I mean, that was something they kept on drilling. It was the border and it was the economy, and that was it. And so, the question you have to ask yourself is, who's that standard bearer? Who's the, who are the people? Who are the few in the Democratic Party who are going to be able to articulate that? It's going to be an easy one to do that right now. If you think of all the folks that were swing voters in 2024, the economy was probably that issue. It wasn't the border. It wasn't abortion this time, that sort of thing. And so if you think about getting those folks back, it should not be too far, right? And one of the things that I think that a lot of folks, and you say this all the time, the difference between the economy and the stock market. We're looking at the stock market right now. It's down 1%. It's down a few percent from its all-time highs. A lot of people, they'll look at their 401k. That's what Trump's going to tell them to look at. But when they look at what they have to pay at the pump, what they have to pay at the grocery store, that should be an easy one. So, let's see how long this war goes. There's a lot that has to do with inflation and what the prices are. And I don't think if that thing is wrapped up, let's say at some point in August, this, it's not going to mean a whole heck of a lot by the time people get to the polls in late October and early November, because the pain is going to already be felt.
Well, I'm wondering, as the market's down 500, every investor, every trader that I talk to every day who's like, this war's over, Trump wants out, it's finished, finito, done. I don't know if they think that today.